Welcome to the Art of Living Free series with Anthony Silard, brought to you by theartoflivingfree.org. Today, Dr. Silard explores more on how to be lonely without becoming depressed, part 2.
As you may be aware, loneliness has skyrocketed over the last few years. So just in January of 2020, before the pandemic, at least before we knew about the pandemic in the United States, in January, Cigna released a study that found that over 3 in 5 Americans today are lonely. Yet loneliness is not the same as depression. We're going to look at the differences between the two. By understanding these differences, it can help us to understand how we can be lonely without having that loneliness devolve into depression. Loneliness and solitude have one thing in common. They both stem from being alone. But one person is lonely and maybe in the middle of hundreds of people, another person is experiencing solitude and maybe completely alone physically. So it's not being alone physically that creates loneliness. So it's not objective isolation. Like if you're living alone, you're objectively isolated, right? That's not what causes loneliness. It's subjective isolation. You subjectively perceive that you're isolated. Well, you can be going on a walk or meditating or doing something else where you really develop your dialogue with yourself, where you do not feel isolated at all. In fact, you may feel more connected with the universe than you ever have in your life. So why does this happen? Well, there's a few reasons. So Roy Baumeister, the social psychologist, he had an article which was called "Bad is Stronger Than Good." And the idea for his article, and he's got a book about it called "The Power of Bad" also, his idea there is that we tend to be much more hyper-vigilant and focus on negative situations and events more than positive situations or events. So when there's something negative that we perceive, it's like the antennae go up and we're like, okay, we better be on hyper alert because our survival may be at stake. Well, where do we get that? You know, it was an evolutionarily adaptive trait. We go way back to the open plains. Our ancestors were out there, and the person who was very positive, who just like happy-go-lucky, life is so good, and they were the first eaten, right? We've never been predators, and so they would making themselves very vulnerable. Whereas the human beings out there on the plains who were who were very vigilant were able to be aware when there was a predator out there and take the necessary steps to survive. So this creates a big problem today because fear, I'm talking about fear here, and anxiety. So fear and anxiety actually are survival emotions. Like if we don't feel anxious when there's a threat, or we don't feel fear when there's a threat, we may succumb to that threat, right? That's not a good idea. But here's the thing, 99.9% of the time, when we experience fear or anxiety, it's not a survival situation. So for example, should I ask her out on a date? Or should I ask him out on a date? Should I speak up about an issue that's important to me? Should I try to have a conversation with a family member about some challenges we've been facing? All of those require courage. But when we feel that fear or anxiety, it can prevent us from taking the necessary action to move forward in our lives and progress. So this is where it's important to realize that we're biologically predisposed to pay much more attention to anything negative rather than something positive. That's why when we're checking email, it's like, oh, okay, this is a very brief email. Are they mad at me? Right? We're looking for something negative because we're like, basically we check email and text messages always with the sense like, I just want to make sure everything's okay. Is there any danger here? Is there someone mad at me? Did I do something wrong? And that's not a good way to go through life. You know what happens when we go through life that way? Based on research by Dr. Keltner, the Berkeley psychologist, when we're on hyper alert and our we have this anxiety and fear that's on constant alert and vigilance. What happens is our immune system starts to break down because it's what's called a cytokine storm. We release cytokine, and then it's hard for us to reduce that, reduce the cytokine. And so what happens is basically that causes organ failure and all kinds of other personal health dysfunctions. So the other part of that is, again, think about human beings and our ancestors out on the open plains, our hominid ancestors, okay? So how did human beings survive? In fact, how did we become at the top of the food chain when there are so many predators out there that can harm us? Well, we developed larger brains and we formed groups, and we started to build like collaborative teams to handle threats. So we said, okay, why don't you cook and I'll stand watch, and I'll take care of the children tomorrow, and then she'll do it the next day, and we'll all delegate what needs to be done so that we can function as a group. Even though we cannot beat these predators with our bare hands, well, you know what? Now that we're functioning together as a group, you know what? Let's build some tools, and maybe we can handle these predators a little better, right? So this was a human collective evolution, okay? So the way we evolved was to be hyper attentive to social cues from others, nonverbal cues, to know who's friend and who's foe, who can I collaborate with and who do I need to avoid. And so we look for those social nonverbal cues all the time. Well, guess what? They ain't here. So we're on there, we're looking for them, and we're not finding them. And that is where it becomes such a essentially dysfunctional experience, because we start to see it more negatively because we're not getting those positively reinforcing social cues from our collaborators and others out there.
Life offers us many challenges, and theartoflivingfree.org offers new ways of thinking so we can see these challenges from a new angle and overcome them. Whether it's Anthony Silard's free blog, video or podcast series, his book, Screened in: The Art of Living Free in the Digital Age, or personalized courses, theartoflivingfree.org will help you refine your life vision and then transform it into action. Find out more at theartoflivingfree.org.